don't mind starting the recording. Perfect. So let's go ahead and get started. So one, thank you for coming in and joining. There was a lot of excitement and a lot of buzz, not only about like the course, but just a different solution for estate management in general. And we have quite a few people in our own personal Slack group for React Query. I've been using it in a personal project that I've been using, and it's been phenomenal, so easy, so many awesome features out of the box. So just give everyone a chance to give a quick little introduction about you and just tell us about your background.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name's Tanner Linsley. I started a company called nozzle.io a while back. In fact, is it possible for me to share my screen?
Yep. Let's see.
I think I might need special permissions to do that.
Good. Try now.
Nope.
How about now? Make a co-host.
Hey, there we go. Got it.
All right, cool.
Sweet. Yeah, so I started a company about 6 years ago with some friends. It's called Nozzle, and we basically reverse engineer Google search results into a giant database. So we have companies that use us to know where they rank in Google against all of their competitors. And while I was building Nozzle's front end, I was the only person building Nozzle front end at the time. And I needed so many tools. So I turned to open source to help me get those tools, and eventually started finding like cracks in the system and spaces in open source where I could make the world better, you know. So my first stop along the way was to Chart.js, and I used it for a while, and then I eventually ended up maintaining it and rewriting it for version 2.0. I don't use this anymore, but if anybody uses Chart.js, you're using code that I wrote about 3 years ago. And Chart.js is awesome. It was so much fun, and it helped me get into open source, and it's used all over the place. I see Chart.js like every day. And random tools. I just paid my utility bill today, and they're using Chart.js to show me the history of my utility bill. So I'm like, sweet. And then after Chart.js, obviously we're doing a lot of data reporting in Nozzle, so I needed to build something to do tables. So I started building React Table, and this was kind of my first big library. And I wish I could talk to you about that today, but there's not enough time. But React Table came next, and it was really fun. After that, I built React Static, which was supposed to compete with the likes of Gatsby and Next.js, but I decided that one person against entire companies of people who are getting paid to work on open source is probably not the best idea. So I decided to give up React Static and move on to something else. And then when React hooks were released, this was a big deal for me, because when hooks came out, I really wanted to ditch Redux. And if any of you have used Redux, it's very rigid, and it's like its whole ecosystem of how to manage state with Redux. You've got thunks and sagas and actions and all these wonderful things that I did use for a very long time. And I'm not going to look down on it too much, but Redux was fun. As soon as hooks came out, I wanted to get rid of Redux. And I wanted to do that using something native like React hooks. So what I decided to do was start building my own library that was going to handle state for me, right? What I quickly learned was that there are two different types of state. And it took me like 2 years to really let this sink in, because up until this point in my brain and in a lot of people's brains, global state, we all say that all the time. You've probably said it 1,000 times already. Global state, right? What the heck is global state? Like, it's just kind of this catch-all term that everybody uses to describe state that you can access anywhere in your application. Just kind of a catch-all. It's global, right? But really, if you look at your state in your applications, there's kind of two types of state that up until React Query for me were the same thing. Now it's very separate, but there's client state and server state. And it's really easy to distinguish between the two. The easiest way that I have to distinguish between client state and server state is whether it's asynchronous or not. If it's synchronous state, then it probably just lives in memory in your app. You know, it's like, is the sidebar open? Is there a modal showing? Is there a toast popping up? Something like that. Like those are things that aren't stored on a server. And then there's like everything else that it seems like a majority of people's apps these days are all server state. Like, you know, you're building a to-do list app, those to-dos are on a server somewhere. If you got users, they're on a server. If you have, you know, any type of data, it's going to end up on a server eventually. And there's just so many things that are different about server state than client state. Primarily, server state is like accessed and controlled completely differently than client state. It's first of all, most of the data for server state is stuff that you don't own or control. So sticking it into global state is kind of like you're pretending like you own that state when you really don't. You know, you just want to make it globally accessible to your app. I get it. The other thing that's interesting is server state uses asynchronous APIs. So like you're never just reading asynchronous state into your app, you know, directly. You've got to use fetch or GraphQL or WebSockets or something, right, to go out and asynchronously get that data, which is something you don't have to do with client state that just lives inside of your app in memory. The other interesting thing is that server state is getting changed usually by other people, or other clients. So like multiple users of your app could be touching the same data structures in your server, and like changing things out from underneath each other. And that can get really dicey when you're just treating it like global state. And the other thing that's interesting is that as soon as you pull something from the server, so say you've got a to-do list that you're sharing with your family or whatever, as soon as it gets pulled from the server into your app, somebody else could change that data and you would technically be out of date, right? Like, and normally you'd have no idea unless you had WebSockets set up or something like that, or you're using Firebase. And it's really difficult to manage this idea of data becoming stale or outdated. And so all of that together, like all those things I just mentioned, you don't have to deal with when you're just working with client state, you know, just sharing things across your app. That's really easy to do using context and use state and stuff like that. But together with all of that, server state has some challenges that you will never experience with client state. And some of those are things like caching and deduping requests, you know, multiple requests going out at the same time. Like you don't want to create multiple requests for the same thing going out from your app at the same time. So deduping those requests. There's also the whole story about updating that data. Like I've only talked about reading that data, but there's also updating and knowing when things are out of date. And then you get into like really low level things like memory management and garbage collection. Like it just brings a whole suite of unique challenges and problems that you have to solve that you normally don't have to think about with client state. And when I looked at that list of those like challenging things, I was like, I want to take every single one of these challenging points about server state and turn them into like features. And I was like, you could take that same list and just talk about them as if they're features. And now all of a sudden you have this cool library like caching, deduping requests, and updating data and controlling when data is out of date. Like all those challenges all of a sudden become unique features of a library. And I was like, I'm going to build it. So I first built it internally at Nozzle to solve Nozzle's data fetching requirements. And then I eventually open sourced it as React Query. I can show you guys a few demos really fast. Let's see if I can share my screen here again. So just on the React query, so it's react-query.10stack right there, if you can see that. And you can come over here to the examples tab and see all these examples for yourself. They're all interactive, which makes them really great for just playing around with, right? But this is a really fun one that's just going and grabbing the stats for the React Query repo. And this is the only code you need to go and fetch that data. Now, if you have ever fetched data in your React applications, you've written way more code than this. You've used use state, and you're tracking loading and errors and the result, and you're calling, set result and set data everywhere, and you've got use effects going on in a bunch of different places to like make sure that none of that is needed with React Query. You just call use query, you give it a unique key, and then you just give it the function that goes and fetches your data. And after that, you can just carry on with actually writing your application. It's very easy, very simple. Here's another basic example where we're fetching some random to-dos, some posts from an API, just like fake posts, right? But what's really cool is when we navigate to these, you'll see a harsh loading state the very first time. But if we go to it again, there's no loading state. There's just a background fetch. And it's happening so fast that you don't even notice it. Even coming back to the main post list is instant, right? It's because React Query is automatically taking care of caching and garbage collection and memory management. It's just doing it all for you out of the box. It's so cool. There's tons more examples, things like window refocus, refetching is really cool, where you can see as you focus on and off of a window, it will actually refetch the data from the server for you, because users are usually, if they leave your browser window for a moment and they come back, they expect everything to be up to date. So we do a background refetch, and as soon as that data comes back in, it just invisibly updates. It makes your app almost feel like it's live. It's so cool. This might not be the best example to show you that. We could probably just do it in the basic example. The other cool thing is that there's dev tools. So you can install the dev tools and click this little dev tool button right here at the bottom. And you can see as we go around the app, new queries coming in at the bottom here and when they're refetching. So if I focus off the window and come back and click on and off of the screen, it refetches the main screen or whatever you're looking at in the background. So if anything had changed, it would just automatically update. It's so cool. It does a lot of cool, crazy stuff. So like not only do those like challenges become features, but it lets you do new, really neat things like pagination and infinite scroll is one of those that is normally very difficult to implement if you're writing everything on your own. But if you're doing pagination with React Query, it makes it so easy to just fetch different pages of things and keep the old page on the screen while you're like waiting for the new one to load, which is something that normally people would say like, well, you need suspense to do that. It does kind of feel suspense-ish if you think about it. Like here, I'll click the next page and the next page just happens immediately. Even if we go to the next page as fast as we can because it's preloading. In fact, let's do this. Let's take off the prefetching because that prefetching is a whole other feature that you can do. Like you can set up your prefetching. Like if you know what your users are going to do, you can just call prefetch query and like the data will be there before your users even click the button, which is crazy. It's such a cool experience. But I'll turn off the prefetching right here so you guys can see what it's like without it. But if we click next page, we'll see page 1 while the next page loads. And you'd think that's something simple, and it is. Like as a UX principle, like it's very simple to show them the existing data while the next one loads, right? But it's so hard to do, and that's almost one of the reasons why they're building suspense and stuff. But you kind of get a little bit of that user experience with React Query without having to do anything at all. It's really awesome. So React Query, like there's so much to cover in it. There's so many cool concepts. Like you can do, interval refetching so that you can, if you have like a chat or something like that, that's just really high velocity updates, you can have your queries refetch in the background every 2 or 3 seconds. And you can do infinite scrolling queries, and there's even an entire API around mutations, just to like, how do you update things in your app? So there's mutations and optimistic updates, like these really cool things that honestly I don't have a ton of time to go into right now. But like they're so worth reading. And the documentation for React Query is like, I'm very proud of it. I spent so long writing the documentation for React Query to make sure that I didn't leave anything out. Like you could read through all the docs for React Query and know everything about it that I do. And I think that's really important. So the next thing I wanted to show you guys too is like, this library's only been out for like 6 months. But it's already being used by like a ton of people. Like I've got people at Target that are using React Query, and Target installs React Query like 60,000 times a day in their CI processes. So they're using React Query a ton. And, you know, Google and Walmart, PayPal, kind of all the big names like Carfax, MLB is kind of a cool one, you know, but there's so many companies who are starting to use React Query because what used to take like thousands of lines of reducers in Redux for your entire application, they're just like deleting all of those lines of code. Like literally, I've had people show me pictures of their PRs and get into GitHub where like it's like thousands of lines are being dropped, and they're adding like 200 or 300 lines of React Query. And it's so cool. So you don't have to write any reducers. You don't have to write really anything at all. You just get to build your app. And that's all I wanted from the beginning when I started building it. So the other cool thing is React Rally, which is happening today, and just barely. Kent C. Dodds, who's one of my good friends here in Utah, he uses React Query, and he's like, basically didn't even have to give, you know, a massive section of his talk on doing server state, because he just said use React Query. He uses React Query in all of his stuff now, and I think that's awesome. If I'm able to convince Kent C. Dodds, I think that something is going right. So if you want to find the library, it's just react-query.tanstack.com. I don't know if you can see if I zoom in on my screen there, but that's the URL there. And then the one thing that I wanted to show you guys too is I know there's some people that don't like reading documentation. It's just not their thing. And so for the last 2 months, I've been putting together this course. And some of you might have already have even taken it, but it's called React Query Essentials. And it is like everything I know about React Query dumped into this course. And, you know, it talks about most of the things I talked about with you guys just barely. Right here is the outline of the course. And there's so many videos, like there's something like 60 or 70 videos on everything I know about React Query, basically. And it's not showing anything that you wouldn't be able to learn yourself out of the documentation if you were to spend a lot of time in there, but it's just put together in more of a narrative way, and it shows you all of the examples of going from 0 to 100, you know, writing these examples from scratch, and I go through every single example and let you know exactly how to do it, and how I think about React Query. So definitely consider taking the course if you guys are interested. For everybody who's in here at the Lambda School, in fact, I'm interested in how many people you guys are on here. I'm going to look here, 45. So for every single person in here, I'm willing to do a 33% discount code for every single person in here. I'm going to be giving it to Matt and letting him distribute the code to whoever wants it. But you'll be able to get 33% off the course, which is one of the biggest discounts I've ever given. And also, if you live in a foreign country, I'm doing what's called a purchase power parity discount. So if you live somewhere where the dollar is not, you know, equal to your currency, then you can get a massive discount. it's fair for everybody. And I'll give you the 30% discount on top of that one too. You can use both of them if I think you can. I'll make sure that you can use both of them if you want. But yeah, so that's kind of React Query in a nutshell. I've given a talk about React Query in a couple of other places. I was going to link to that. If you wanted to go even more in depth, I'm gonna paste the link to that video here in the chat. But really what I wanted to do is like hear from you guys. I know that, it's one thing to listen to me talk all day about React Query, and, you can go watch videos if you want. But really what I wanted to do is give you guys an opportunity, as like students in, learning about React and learning about these types of things. I wanted to give you guys an opportunity to ask me some questions. It could be about React Query or just about React in general. But I just want to hear from you all about, what you'd like to get out of this from me.
Yeah. So one, Tanner, thank you so much just for like going through all that. I had all these questions listed out and you just blitzed through all of them. And I couldn't recommend your course enough. Like the getting started and just like going through your content, from tutorial to live in your application, it takes hours, like not even. And everything is just so thought out. It's so calculated, and it made for a really easy, seamless transition from things that we had learned in the past, which is what I really want to touch on. Here at Lambda School, we are taught Redux, context API, reducers, kind of like that flux pattern. And you had made a post on Twitter about like the typical pattern that you see React devs use and why you just don't think it's like an efficient solution. I would love if you could touch a little bit more on like what those typical patterns are and like why it's just so overkill for what we're doing and just handling that server-side state.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, the biggest main pattern I see people doing is using global state management libraries to manage server state. And this is where all of the trouble starts for so many people. I don't care if you're using Redux or MobX, or even if you've built your own, solution. You could even be using anything like Zustand or just you name it. There's a million global state manager libraries out there, and I use one too. But when you start managing server state with that client state manager, you're going to get into icky situations. Because of all of these things that I just talked about, how server state is so different. And you can feel all of these libraries reaching out, trying to solve that problem. Like Redux, has an entire ecosystem full of middlewares to solve asynchronous data. They've got Thunks, they've got Sagas, they've got Redux, Redux async and Redux data. Like they got so many middlewares, and same with MobX. But the problem is that they're all still tied to solving that client state problem as well. And React Query has nothing to do with your client state. And that kind of boggles people's minds in the beginning. They're like, well, how do I do client state? How do I do global state with React Query? I'm like, no, you don't. You can use them at the same time. I've had people who still use Redux and React Query together, but they're just using the right tool for the right job. They've got all their client state in Redux, and they're still issuing actions and whatnot, and they've got all their server state in React Query. Like, just by making that decision of using the right tool for the right job saves so much headache in the end. That's the biggest pattern I see. That was one of my last tweets I put out there. I'm like, if you are considering writing a new application using only Redux and you have server data, which pretty much every app does, then you're in for some trouble.
Yeah, no, for sure. I totally agree. And another thing I like to highlight are the cool features that you have implemented like right out of the box, like caching and prefetching. Nothing quite made me feel like a super developer, like I had superpowers, than the caching and prefetching. Like it just makes you feel like you're being so much more efficient on your resources. And it's so cool to like see the user development or the user experience kind of like feel so much better and so much like more part of the UX. Could you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think you made a great point right there, just with the words you used, that not only did you feel it, but the user experience itself became much better. Just and it became better not by adding more code into your app, but it became better by taking it out and just using a tool that's for the right job, right? And I think that's important, because if you're going to invest in tools, you need to make sure that those tools are going to be good for both you and your users. If your tools don't have some kind of trickle down effect on your users, then why are you doing them? Why are you adopting them, right? Obviously, if it helps developers like TypeScript, your users don't feel the immediate benefits of TypeScript, right? But if you use TypeScript in a team, it helps you avoid bugs, and it trickles down, right? um, I think when you can find tools that not only help you as a team, but also immediately pass benefit down to the user, that those are tools that are just um, they're mobilizing for your app. They they can they can take it to the next level without you having to invest a lot of time and effort. And that's something that I think React Query does, is, like you said, just you drop your function in there and all of a sudden you feel way more productive, because things are just always up to date. And then also you show it to a user and they're kind of like where they might have been used to seeing a loading screen every time they go into a page, maybe they only see it the first time now, and so the second time they go in and they're like, whoa, that that was really fast. I feel like I'm using a native application. And those are the kind of micro experiences you want your users to have. You want them to feel like they're using something that is just immediate, instant, and native, and React Query gets you a step closer to that, I think.
Yeah, no, so well said. And that was kind of it for my questions. So we can open it up to like the Zoom group chat if anyone has any questions they want to go over or anything they'd like to ask Tanner.
Somebody had a question in here, looks from Anthony Campolo. Have you ever looked at Redwood.js at all? It's currently using Apollo client, but Peter, I don't know who Peter is talking about spiking an implementation with React Query to see how it compares. I have heard about Redwood.js. I know that it's pretty hot right now. I personally don't use it. I haven't used it yet, but if he wants to use React Query in it, then that sounds like a great idea. I do know of a similar library called Blitz, that's built on top of Next, which is kind of like a framework on top of Next. And they use React Query internally to handle all of their data fetching. So I'm sure if they can do it, then Redwood can too.
All right. While we wait for other questions to come in, I know you have a comparison on your site, but for those of us that don't feel like they're persuaded either way, what do you think is the main differentiator between using React Query and something like SWR, who both seem to be like kind of like on the coming up? And if we're not like super swayed either way, like why would we use React Query over
Right.
something else?
In fact, I'll pull up the comparison chart here really quick just so people can see it. Let's see, let's head back to React Query. So if you come to the docs, right here, there's a comparison page. And it's kind of like, here's all these indicators of, this is included in first class, or it's kind of supported, or requires extra code and whatnot, or it's not supported at all. And as you come down this page, you can kind of see, I have Apollo in here as well. So you can kind of see how everything stacks up. And honestly, SWR is not a bad tool. It's great. React Query and SWR were developed in parallel at the same time without knowledge of each other. I didn't know about SWR. They didn't know about React Query. That's kind of crazy. It means that some conditions in the ecosystem were right for these libraries to come out. SWR takes a much smaller approach. And so, they have maybe 2 or 3 kilobytes less on bundle size, but when you were talking about 4 or 5 kilobytes, it's not big at all. But you'll notice that like they don't have native dev tools. Their pagination system is not really true pagination. like you guys saw in that example. They don't have things like garbage collection. They have one of the maintainers wrote their own mutation hooks, which they basically just stole. They used mutation hook from React Query and open sourced it in a more agnostic way. Good for them. I'm okay with that. But again, it's not native to the library. They don't really have great, APIs for query cancellation and some of these deeper knowledge ones about like query partial query matching are things that like are hard to explain to people, but when you use the library, they make the API that much easier to use. And there's a few things that, React Query doesn't have, which I don't think are that important, like network status refetching and even things that like Apollo does that, none of us do over here, like the cache dehydration and rehydration and whatnot. At the end of the day, it's just going to come down to what you prefer. And with most people that I've talked to that have tried both, they just like React Query because the API, it feels a little more comfortable. It's just, it's a little simpler to use, a little more intuitive thing. It's kind of a batteries included approach. You're going to find yourself writing. I mean, in SWR's documentation, it says inside of the documentation, oh, you can do this, but you're going to have to write your own little function to do this. And I just don't think that's a great user experience, especially for people who are just starting out learning, or for people who just want to use a library that has everything included out of the box. Other than that, like all of these libraries are fantastic, and they all have, their pros and cons. And when it comes down to it, the trade-offs of saving 2 kilobytes but missing out on all these great features right here are just not worth it for me.
Yeah. One of the things that you touched on was the dev tools. I love the dev tools. It is so cool to have that high visualization to see like what state your queries are in and how they're being cached and where like what kind of state they stay in. So it's really cool.
Yeah, the dev tools are highly integrated. I love them. I use them all the time on if I use dev tools, then I know that it's a good thing, because I didn't even use the Redux dev tools really. I know that's a big selling point for Redux, that it has dev tools. After a while, I found myself not even really opening them up because I just debugged with logs everywhere else. But the React Query DevTools feel different to me because they're visualizing things that normally would be very confusing to just console log out. You'd see so many different logs, like the colors and the numbers and everything really help you understand what's happening with your data. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, if that wasn't a selling point enough, I think we all are kind of overwhelmed with the amount of console logs we do on a daily basis. So to have something that's like way more visual and just so much more easy to digest and see,
yeah,
is a great feature.
Stephen G asked me in chat, are you building any new interesting apps? What are you passionate about? I'm not building any new interesting apps right this moment. I would love to. I'm very busy with my startup right now. So that's taking up a lot of my time. Any extra time I have, I'm spending either with my family or writing a course for React Query or something like that. I do plan on spending more time on React Table and React Charts in the coming months. He also asked if there are any good meetups where I'm at. I don't think that's super relevant for this forum, just because everybody's coming from different places. Let's see. TL Huzu says, it's epic how connected you are to the problems being solved by a particular tool. Could you talk a bit about your mindset in determining whether something is the right tool for the right job? I think a lot of that intuition on whether you're using the right tool for the right job just comes out of experience of using tools over and over. Like, I feel like I've used every single state management tool that has been presented to me. I've tried them all, and I have tried to solve server state and like asynchronous server state for years. Since React came out, it's been a pain point. And I tried Redux and I tried MobX and I tried all of these, Redux Saga, all of these different tools that claim to do it. And it's not that they can't do it, they do, but it just wasn't at the level of simplicity that I wanted. So after you have evaluated enough of the things in an ecosystem, you have this level of knowledge where you're saying, okay, if I put a Venn diagram up on the whiteboard of every tool I've ever tried, you can easily spot the gaps. And if those gaps are big enough and you have the knowledge that it takes to fill that gap, then that is a perfect opportunity to say, I'm going to build the right tool for the right job there. And that's exactly what I did with React Query. It just took a long time to find that gap. You know, there's a lot of voices out there telling you, use this library, you know, use my library, use whatever. I'm one of those voices. So take it all with a grain of salt, I guess. Aaron Wilder said, is React static dead? How long have you been programming? How did you get started? And what's your favorite way of learning something new? React static is not dead. Somebody is currently maintaining it. I don't know how active they are. It is mostly dead to me because I don't use it anymore. I use Next.js. I do not use Gatsby. I don't enjoy Gatsby. I don't plan on using GraphQL to build a blog. And unless you're a big GraphQL junkie and it gets you fired up, I would focus on using Next.js if you're planning on building any like SSR enabled websites, or if you just want a really fast website. Next.js is my top pick right now. Nozzle.io is written in Next.js. So is TannerLinsley.com, which is just a little dumb blog I have that doesn't have a lot of content on it. And also all of my documentation sites for all of my sites are built in Next.js. So you could say I'm very heavily invested in the future of Next. How long have I been programming? Well, I wrote my first HTML file when I was in high school. And then I learned how to use Joomla for an internship. And then I went to school for film, for, you know, film and movies and film, you know, videography. Don't know why. And then I ended up switching my major to audio engineering because I love audio. And then I ended up being convinced that I need to be a software engineer by one of my required class professors because, I don't know, I've been writing websites my entire life, but never considered it as a profession until then. And I actually didn't start programming for real, like using PHP or JavaScript until about 10 years ago. So I've been doing JavaScript for about 10 years. If you were trying to hire a React developer, would you go to Upwork or some other site to find them? Honestly, I don't know. I'm not trying to hire any developers right now, and I never have. So I'm definitely not the right person to ask for that. So it'll be an interesting discovery opportunity for me when Nozzle gets to the point where I can hire more developers. That's going to be something new for me, but I can't answer that question right now. Did anybody have any questions that's on video or don't want to type?
All right, so that will do it. Tanner, thank you so much for your time. Just really appreciate just like the interaction between me and you on Twitter, and you also taking the time out of your day to come over here and help us just kind of on our developer journey. So really appreciate it. Best luck to you in the future, and invested in the success of React Query just as you are in Next.js. So good luck. Sure. Keep maintaining, keep doing great things, and appreciate your time.
Yeah. So I just dropped the link and the coupon code for anybody who wants to use it here in the chat. Well, I guess no. Here, I'll do it again. This time it'll be to everyone and not just Stephen. There you go. And I'll send it to you if for anybody else who wants to use it. But yeah, thanks for having me. I really love talking about React Query. I'm very passionate about it because I feel like it just really helps people be better at building applications and you know, doing what they want to do. We all want to be software engineers, and we all want to build awesome applications and sell them for, millions of dollars, or get that job that's paying us a bunch of money, salary, or whatever. And I think React Query contributes to that bottom line. So I'm glad that you guys would want to have me to talk about it.
All right. Well, thanks, Tanner. Thanks everyone for coming. I'll send out the code, and also join our channel, hashtag React Query in Slack. So, all right. Take care, guys. Have a good one.